I have the pleasure of introducing the moderator of our Fireside, Vilas Dar. Vilas is an inspiring voice of hope and engagement for an AI-enabled, human-centered future. As a philanthropist, technologist, and scholar, Vilas advocates for an equity-based approach to designing products and policies that create a thriving, sustainable, and equitable world. He serves as president and trustee of the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, is a member of the UN's high-level advisory body on AI, the Global Partnership on AI, the OECD Expert Working Group on AI Futures, the Global Future Council on AI at the World Economic Forum, among many, many other affiliations. So, that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Deborah. Thank you. I think I'm all set. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. What an amazing day to be together. There is a frisson of excitement, I think, and a moment of hope. I think many of you know that this week the United Nations came together and yesterday passed something called the Global Digital Compact. It's relevant to our work today for many reasons. Our speakers will speak to it as well, but the idea that the world we create is one that is no longer just left to technology companies who build products and governments who try to limit them, but rather rename the narrative that our digital future is a shared endeavor. It's ours to create. I look around the room, I see so many friends in this room that have been an instrumental part of bringing us to this moment. I want to thank you all, and I want to use that as a grounding moment to introduce our two amazing speakers here. First, David Siegel, my dear friend. David, if you'll join me here on stage, the founder of 2 Sigma, an investor, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and somebody who I have looked to many times over the past years for your thinking on how we create a more involved, inclusive, technical future. David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
As you like, please. And second, my very dear friend, Undersecretary General of the United Nations, Amandeep Singh Gill. Amandeep is a leader across domains, somebody I respect deeply as an intellectual and an academic, as a policymaker, but much more than that, as somebody who brings your whole heart, your visionary leadership to this work. Please join me in welcoming Amandeep and giving him a round of applause for stewarding the adoption of the Global Digital Compact this week. Thank you, gentlemen, please. Many of you in the room know me, and I said to both David and Amandeep that our teams had done incredible work to curate a conversation for us, had prepared wonderful questions and talking points. You will see that this conversation may not follow those so closely. Instead, I think we're at a day during the week of UNGA that requires real conversation, that requires authenticity, that requires us to bring our intellectual and sometimes provocative viewpoints. I'm going to invite both of you to do that with me today. David, I want to start with you. You've been really kind of an early visionary in the idea that technology can do good in the world. I'm not talking about the last 5 years, I'm talking about the last decades. You have been an expert in AI before many in the world thought of AI as the topic of the moment. But you've also been a commentator, not just on the technology itself, but its social ramifications. I want to just start by asking you to frame up how you think about public interest tech. Why is it a conversation that's essential? How does your experience bring us to a place now where we can talk about it with meaning?
Well, thank you for the very kind introduction. My thinking about the impact of technology on society really does go back a decade or more. And I was very fortunate that as a young kid, I became interested in tech before people were particularly interested in it, beyond having it be like a back office kind of capability that people didn't pay any attention to. So I, as really in my youth, imagined that tech was going to actually be quite impactful. And much to my disappointment, I have watched that the impact has often had a lot of negativity associated with it. That was not something that I had anticipated. And I think like I'm thinking back to my days in grad school, when the internet first was ramping up, and I imagined this thing is nothing but good. But then all of a sudden I watch, oh, well, there's connecting everyone together and having it be a free-for-all actually has created a lot of negativity. When I watched the price of disk storage drop, I thought that was going to be a fantastic thing because we can now do things with computers we couldn't do before, but then I watched the disk drives suck up all of our personal and private material, and no one seems to be paying any attention to it. And so my journey to where we are today really did come from seeing both the good side, but the bad side, and coupled with the fact that so many of my colleagues were paying absolutely no attention to the impact that they were having. And, so this notion that people are, someone once told me, I don't know if it's true, that, Wiener von Braun was watching a rocket, one of his rockets be launched, and someone turned to him and said, "Where is it going, Dr. von Braun?" And he said, "That's not my department, I just make them go up." and so I think that the tech world has adopted that kind of compartmentalization, which is problematic.
David, and we'll spare names today, but this abstraction you're sharing of a mentality about tech comes into crystalline form for me. I mean, I think almost exactly a year ago, we sat together, Amandeep, with a leader from the tech world who said something along the lines of, we don't really need to have a conversation about rights right now. In 5 years, the AI will be so good enough that you won't really have to worry about vulnerability. That was about a year ago. Last night, I heard from another very, very prominent leader in tech almost exactly the same sentiment. Don't worry, the tech will get so good that we'll be able to deal with our social problems. Like, how do you think about this? You've spent much of your career in the private sector, right? And this hubris of private sector technology, it's driven a lot of capital formation, it's driven economic outcomes. There's a lot of rationalizations for why it's okay.
It's very seductive. And so the argument that we should allow AI to evolve unchecked is, it's a very sexy argument, which is, look, it's going to cure cancer, it'll solve climate change problems, just give us another 5 years, and AGI is going to be so fantastic that any of the negativity or negative externalities that we're experiencing today will be pale in comparison to the benefit. And so if we have rules and regulations to slow down this advancement, all we're doing is hurting ourselves. And so we should just let it go. So for example, I've heard arguments that copyright laws, well, sure, but we should really allow the large language models to have suck up all of this material without so much regard to existing rules and regulations because of the immense benefit that they're going to bring. And so this is, if it were really true that in 5 years, AGI is going to solve all of our problems and we'll have nothing to worry about, perhaps this is an okay trade-off. But if you don't believe that's true, which I don't think it's true, you end up in a different spot. So you could end up with a lot of harm, but far less benefit than people might have imagined.
That's right, David. And I think the challenge is we sometimes frame that as a what do you believe, rather than as a what is a real sort of grounding that lets us make decisions today that's grounded not just in what we know about the technology, but about the values and frameworks we want to use around them. Amandeep, I want to come to you. And I want to take this idea head on, right? The conceit that technology by itself will improve the world. You've been quite a visionary in framing the fact that this is not a technological challenge. It's something quite larger, and you give us an alternative view of thinking about the world. Share a bit of how you think about that.
I think this hubris is real, and it is actually dangerous. Dangerous in terms of not only how we think about the risks and act on them, but also how we should go about harnessing the opportunities. And that's the big question in the Global South. And that's why public interest technology is so important, because the Global South doesn't have the kind of dollars that the Global North has to throw at ICT spend, ICT infrastructure. They need to make their dollars count. So the supply side push on connectivity, on digital goods and services has to be met with a demand side pull, where this technology works for the public, where it makes a difference in the life of a farmer or a health worker in a remote place. So I think, David, and you are absolutely right about the problems with this hubris. What's the alternative? I think you mentioned the Global Digital Compact. I mean, it's Dag Hammarskjöld, we have this plaza right across. He said the UN was not designed to take us to heaven, but to save us from going to hell. At least we have a baseline now with the Global Digital Compact. some principles, commitments, actions for an open, free, secure, inclusive digital future. And in that, for the first time, we have a statement on relevant to public interest technology. So open source, digital public goods, digital public infrastructure. So we have something like a pull on the actions that are happening, admirable actions, but too fragmented at this stage so that we can make this count. Now, in a concrete way, and one scenario in this alternative vision is imagine if, let's say, solving for cancer, solving plastic. This is, glib talk. It requires a lot of hard work. It'll require us to put together data sets around disease surveillance, around climate change, resilient agriculture practices that have not been done before and that you can't just scrape off the internet. So large language models are not going to solve that problem for you. So we need to create those communities, those interdisciplinary communities, not just the techies, but the social scientists, the ethicists and others who pool together those data sets and then get us to a place where tech starts to work for everyone at scale, impactful. And you've heard this said many times in the advisory body, that the way to light up the sky is a million fireflies. It's not a few searchlights.
That's right, beautiful. And I want to dig deeper into this. Amandeep, the high-level advisory body for, I think, people in this room are particularly aware, convened by the Secretary General about a year ago, has just issued our final report. And I've heard you speak, Amandeep, to the kind of 1, 2, 3 approach. I think particularly for this group of folks that are working on building public interest technology at scale, the structure might be helpful. What are the recommendations in the report, now in the Global Digital Compact, about how we actually create capacity at scale?
Absolutely. So this is the 1, 2, 3 punch on global capacity building on AI. But this is accompanied by 2 very critical pieces. One is an international scientific panel on regular science-based assessments of the capabilities and their implications. So it's not just about the safety side, which in some ways is a distracting conversation, but what are the real capabilities so that we don't have knowledge asymmetries and we are not fooled by the hype or the excessive pessimism, and policy making doesn't happen in the dark. I think that'll be a critical global public good on the model of the IPCC, but iterating more rapidly. And the other critical piece is the policy dialogue so that countries learn from each other. Our governance approaches are based in shared norms, international human rights treaties, agreements on gender, environment, and sustainable development. But what you're referring to, this 1, 2, 3 punch on capacity building, none of the rest will matter if communities and public officials don't have the capacity to handle this, to make policy, etc. So number 1 in this 1, 2, 3 punch is a capacity development network where you train public officials, where you pool training material, trainers, etc., to deliver mass at scale capacity development on AI governance and AI innovation. You also provide access to data, compute, and talent so that more countries around the world can build their own small to medium-sized models. Not everyone needs to develop the large language models, but for cultural diversity, for solving local problems, we need that democratization of AI. And then a related aspect, the second aspect is a global fund on AI, which I think should pool public and private sector funds on which the Secretary General has been asked to provide options by the end of the year. And we'll see how that goes forward. I think philanthropies will play an important role in that. And finally, the third piece in this is a global data framework. Today, small and medium-sized enterprises, startups in the global south don't have access to training data sets, particularly cross-border training data sets. A few companies can buy all the data that they want. So how do we facilitate AI innovation ecosystem around the world? By working on the data marketplace, by shaping it, by providing for those agreements, liability arrangements, model arrangements that help them access the data they need.
I want to pick up this point, and David, I want to come to you. In one of the kind of visceral gut punches of this work, I think of a conversation I had with a government official from a West African country, and I'll distill the whole conversation down to a few lines. Essentially, they were so proud to show me the data they had about rare earth mineral deposits across the country. And from commercial and private providers using satellite data, they were able to give me one of the most granular pieces of information I've ever seen about here's where you go if you want to find cobalt and nickel. And I thought it was an amazing moment, right? Like incredible human ingenuity and satellites and data systems and predictive models. And then I asked, and can you show me where the sources of surface level potable water are? Safe water for your communities across the country. And I was greeted with almost like a look of confusion. Why would we have that? Why would we have collected it? It struck me that we live in a world where so much of what we're doing around data and AI and everything else is driven exactly as you spoke to, Amandeep, by the commercial interests in creating this. There is an alternative approach. You've spearheaded a lot of this work through the endowment, through our work in public interest tech. How do we break the commercial incentives as the primary driver of how we build technology at scale?
I do think that's a wonderful question. I have tremendous faith in the private sector, and I'm a believer that the private sector has brought tremendous innovation to the world for good. But one thing that over the years that I have learned is that the private sector, for whatever reason, doesn't solve all problems. It's to some extent very much of a herd mentality issue, where the way that capital is allocated by the private sector often is very faddish, and people want to jump onto the bandwagon because they see a great opportunity. So oddly enough, the global private sector handles certain kinds of needs of society, but then many things are just kind of overlooked. Part of this is, I think, driven by the fact that many companies today in the private sector are only interested in problems at great scale, and that they only want to develop businesses that have the possibility for creating something that is of Google size or Microsoft size, market cap wise. And that's kind of the dream. But the difficulty with that vision is that most of the problems that we need solved in our world are not of that scale. And so people aren't really in the private world, not only they're not looking at these things, but they don't even really know about them. If you have a monoculture where, for example, much of the AI work is being driven out of California and in China, they may not even be exposed to what all the needs are. And so there is an opportunity here. This is essentially a market failure for governments, the United Nations, and philanthropically funded organizations, and also academic institutions to step in and to help guide people to problems that might otherwise be ignored. The private sector can then be activated, but they need to know more about where the gaps are, and that doesn't necessarily happen. Public interest tech, in my mind, is part of the process of not only trying to solve the problems themselves, but more importantly, trying to activate government and private sector people to be interested in things that are otherwise not getting proper attention.
So I think this is really interesting, and maybe this will take us to a place that's slightly more provocative. I think often about the fact that the alternative future I want is not one that relies on the private sector to provide scale, but actually allows us to hold technology capacity from ideation all the way through to delivery in a new form of institutions that sit apart from the need for private sector capital and initiatives. But I have a sense that maybe that's a contention we should engage with together. Amandeep, your thoughts?
Yeah, Vilas, and as it said, the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And, that kind of an alternative vision in some shape or form is already there. And it's not because, people have designed it like that, but it just came about. So if you look at the India stack, for example, so where you spent about, probably $25–40 million to develop the tech, and then rolled it out dollar per person. So you have nearly 1.4 billion people with digital ID, and you built a payments layer on top of that, and then there's a data exchange layer that's come up recently. So you brought 500 million people into the modern financial sector. 55% of them women, 66% from the villages, from rural areas. So that's grown the base on which the economy stands. And then you have 20 trillion rupees a month of transactions now going through that, growing 45% a year. That's another way to get to scale. And this is public interest technology. I remember the early stages of this discussion a few years back when people didn't understand, oh, digital public goods, digital public infrastructure, this must be anti-market. This is against the private sector. You are kind of, this is state-run capitalism. And if you look at the actual evidence on the ground, and it took some time convincing the payments companies, the MasterCards, the Visas, and so on, that this is infrastructure, public infrastructure. You can also play on it. Actually, the market share of those companies has also gone up. So the entire pie has grown, and everyone has a slice of it. So that alternative vision in some form exists. But I think if we have to get ready for the age of AI, then we have to take these digital commons, let's call them digital commons, into other areas, data for the SDGs, models for climate change and other areas, where the market incentives are not yet there, but they will eventually come if we build those digital commons.
David, is there a version of a technical future that doesn't require the voluntary participation of tech companies to take solutions to scale?
I hope so.
Really off script now, by the way.
Yeah, I believe there is. I believe that there is. I think that that's an extremely complicated question, but I would say the following: that we are in the very early days of the tech sector becoming so outsized in importance. This is brand new. And so there are growing pains. And the sector itself is trying to chart its own future. Governments, for example, in the United States and in Europe are looking at regulation for the industry. There's a lot of thought about antitrust in the United States. This sector is in its early days. And we're now really in an interesting period where governments are trying to determine how to shape it, and companies may make different decisions about how to manage their growth. And so one of the, I think, opportunities here for people in the room here is to be thinking about what sort of incentives should we be offering to the private sector. I'm not all that much in favor of everything being punitive. The question is there a way to create a better set of incentives for the private sector to encourage them to pursue maybe more medium to longer term strategies? I think, and this is not my thought, but many people have pointed out that the focus on short-term problems that capitalism often pushes for does essentially create a little issue here, because many of the things that we're really talking about can be achieved over the medium to longer term, but the private sector doesn't generally have much incentive to worry about that. And I think that might be the part of the origin of the trouble that many of us feel is occurring in the private sector.
The role that each of us play, actually through our unique institutions, is to support that thesis, right? That there are ways to build incentives to support market failures, to create new mechanisms of power. You've done something quite incredible with your staff and your team in your investment in Scratch, in this idea that we can actually support the idea that we can build large-scale digital literacy and talent at scale. Tell us a bit about the Scratch story and why it's so important to you.
Well, that I'm very proud of that. That story began quite a while ago when my son, who was in kindergarten, told me that he wanted to learn how to code, and he knew my own passion for that, and he wanted to I guess follow in his dad's footsteps. Right now, soon he'll be applying to graduate school in computer science and AI. So I think he is following that pathway, which I'm very proud of. But Scratch I saw as an opportunity to essentially do at scale what my son was achieving at home. And I never imagined that today there'd be, over the last 5 years, 100 million kids have learned how to code with Scratch at a cost of less than 25 cents per kid. But I think the real learning I took away from Scratch is that meaningful change can occur with essentially minimal cost. We shouldn't think of every problem that we have as requiring hundreds of billions of dollars to solve. And this is actually, I mean, I haven't really said this before, but this is impromptu. But I think my greatest takeaway from Scratch is that we should all be, a lot of people are thinking that the problems that we have in our society will require essentially vast amounts of money to solve, and then that leads to people throwing their hands up in the air saying we can't do anything about it. Now, Scratch has shown that we can actually make a meaningful contribution to, for example, the digital divide problem without spending very much money at all. I mean, you'd be surprised at the budget for this thing. Very few people even support it, yet it has global impact. And so I think that we should all focus our efforts on what are impactful ways to address these societal problems that with technology that allows us to do things at low cost. I think there are plenty of opportunities out there that we haven't touched upon yet collectively.
This is great. And I will tell you, my niece and my nephews use Scratch, like train on it. I'm sure many folks in the room, even as an adult, I love using it. I think it's super cool. So it's a really good story.
And I'll add to that Raspberry Pi. Those circuits have really democratized access to machine learning, AI, and there are many other examples. And I absolutely agree with David. We don't have to throw billions at it. There are other ways to scale. The forest scales. Monoculture doesn't scale in nature. So I think we should think about these alternative paradigms. The examples are already there.
So let's. I also have somewhat dangerously not been given a timer here, so somebody will tell me when we're done. But I want to keep going. We have about 5 minutes. So I want to go back to this crystallizing moment, Amandeep, and I shared this with you earlier today. We were in a session with some great leaders from around the world. Some of the people in this room were there, and we were talking about capacity building. And some of our private sector representatives talked about how they were investing in talent skilling in different kinds of ways. And a young woman who leads a social enterprise in East Africa raised her hand, and she said, as a young Black female entrepreneur in Africa, I'm about as overcapacitated as I can be. There are so many people who are coming to come and build my capacity. It struck me because I think it's unfortunately true. There's plenty who think they know well enough what the rest of the world needs. In our work on the H Lab, we talked about this, that it wasn't just about picking a single critical enabler, that we needed a new approach. And you speak so eloquently about actually how we turn communities from consumers, from advisors, actually into architects of their own destinies. What do we take from these kinds of stories and these lessons that we're learning? What's the right path forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can't parachute in capacity. We can't push it down. The right path forward is exploration, interdisciplinary exploration, of where the needs are and how technology can come in thoughtfully. I'm reminded often of the geek heresy, Kentaro Toyama's book. He went wide-eyed to India, tech will solve 100 problems. And then based on his experience, he wrote this book. The critical thing is empowerment of people. And where tech can empower people, it does wonders. Where tech disempowers us, then we headed down a road to hell. So we have to, through this exploration on the ground with communities, discover where the empowering opportunities are. And then we get to the enablers. The enablers are critical. But enablers, again, thoughtful enablers. What's the kind of cross-domain talent and systems we need? Because I've been to, I was in a tech company, big tech company, and they were solving for malaria. And I happened to ask the most stupid question. I shouldn't have asked it. Has anyone here ever had malaria or lived in a place where there's malaria? Yeah, answer is no. So I think those kind of cross-domain understandings, capacity, then of course the talent on AI, mathematics, linear algebra, all of that, I mean, this is where I think your friend is perhaps complaining. Everyone says, oh, take a course, take another course. And then, there is data set. And doing the data piece, I think part of it is exploration. My experience with digital health and AI in health before coming back to the UN, when you start to build data sets together, I mean, like on antimicrobial resistance, how do you prescribe the antibiotics in a particular context? What kind of a data model do you need? In different places, Singapore, India, what's the most relevant data? Where is it stored? And automatically through that discussion, you build capacity for the broader digital transformation change. So I think those are the thoughtful ways to build capacity. And frankly, I'm worried that we will have fragmentation because there is politics behind capacity today. AI is frankly a geopolitical issue. So whether you come at it from the national security angle or my AI is better than yours or my AI summit was more flashy than yours, so we have that problem to handle. How do we get people to work together? There's so much selfishness in the world today. We have to work on the incentives.
Have you had malaria?
Yes.
As have I, and I will not ask David. I hope the answer is no. Look, I think we have a few minutes together, and I want to end on my favorite question, as you both know, right? Which is I'm going to ask you, as I contemplate the words of Martin Luther King Jr., as I think about the fact that a conversation about public interest technology should never start from a conversation about technology, but should instead start from a conversation about human rights, about dignity, about involvement. And I'm struck also by the idea that we face an accelerating moment in time, the fierce urgency of now. I'm going to ask you both, what are you hopeful about in the next 12 months? What are you seeing happening that gives us a sense? And for the people in this room that, again, I look to as my partners, as our leaders and visionaries in this framework, what should give us all hope as we go into a morning and an afternoon where we'll hear from many of them about the initiatives they're taking on? What gives you hope? David, maybe first to you.
Well, 12 months is a pretty short time horizon, so how about several years? And what really does give me hope is a convening like this one, where people are beginning to think in a more, let me characterize it as interdisciplinary way, where instead of compartmentalization, which I think leads to suboptimal outcomes, there's a more broader set of thinking. I look at universities, for example. Everyone now is putting more focus on interdisciplinary studies, trying to bring together people who have different perspectives, different skills. And so instead of a computer scientist just working all alone in a room, they partner with someone from maybe the biology department, or maybe material science, or maybe environmental studies. And these people coming together, even in a university community, will then stimulate much broader-based thinking. And in addition, groups like the one we have convened here today will bring together different perspectives, different points of view, which will then give all of us, myself included, new ideas about what we can be doing to advance technology in a better way. And so I am extremely optimistic that the next several years will be very positive in the way that I just described.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Amandeep?
Vilas, you remember down to the day 1 year ago, we were at the NYU building across from Central Park and starting this conversation on international governance of AI. It was a very nice discussion, but there was so much skepticism. It's moving too fast, you can't get the world together, how are you going to land, even if you get some decent recommendations, how are you going to land them in policy? And here we are. So Sunday, the Global Digital Compact captures the essence of those discussions. So that gives me hope. Much of the progress has been driven by younger delegates in the UN, not the senior ambassadors, the white-haired men mostly. So that gives me hope. We have a pact and also a declaration on future generations. So I think what David spoke about, what's happening in our public education institutions, I think that also gives me hope. Many of the people that you speak to who work in the tech sector, they are interested in social impact, but there's a machine they are in, the political economy of this. I think if we can slowly start to shift that a little bit, then our hopes will grow even more.
I love that. Thank you both. I want to close with just a final vignette for you both and for the crew here. And Amandeep, you've been such an instrumental part of this, but we had an incredible opportunity this week to bring an artist to the United Nations. His name is Rafiq Anadol. He's a dear friend and amazing visionary. And what Rafiq and I brought to the UN in an exhibit that was 80 feet long and 10 feet wide as heads of state walked past it all week was something that I think squarely fits into the ethos of this community. It was starting with ethical data collection from communities across the world, 100 million pieces of imagery of natural biomes, of coral reefs, of rainforests, every piece of data collected with the consent of the communities that are the stewards of those lands. That data set in the use for this art exhibit used to train a machine learning model that takes that imagery and turns it into abstract, beautiful artworks. The machine learning model trained exclusively on renewable energy, using power from the grid when there was excess grid available. It is, as Rafiq calls it, the slowest model that's currently commercially available. Rather than trying to push and build new nuclear power in order to train a model, we used what was available. And in its experience, moment in time where you look at this artwork and people said, I've seen Rafiq's other work, it appealed to my mind. The Secretary General of the UN came and said, somehow it feels like this appeals to my soul. A connection to our planet, our natural spaces, a place where AI lets us reframe exactly how we belong to the world around us. I think there's plenty to hope for. I think there are alternative models forward. Amandeep, David, I want to thank you for your leadership and friendship and partnership, and we're so excited for the discussion we'll have here together. Thank you, everyone. Over to Katie Knight. Thank you. Amandeep, thank you.